This is part 3 of an introduction to person-centered care and person-centered recovery planning. In part 1, we went over the basic information about the course, introduced the 4 Ps of PCRP, and covered 2 of the Ps, philosophy and product. In part 2, we focused entirely on process. In the final segment, we will review the written document, Plan with a capital P, and share some closing notes. As a review, the 4 Ps of person-centered recovery planning are philosophy, product, process, and plan. The last P in the 4 Ps is the most specific in many ways, and there is an entire course dedicated that you can access via CTAC called Person-Centered Recovery Planning, a review of plan components. That course is presented by Amanda Bowman, who you met as an interviewee in this course. In that training, she reviews the specific elements of the plan document. The last P, the plan or the written product. It reflects the philosophy, intended product or outcomes, and person-centered process that were used to develop it. We find that it can be helpful to make a few notes about the difference between different types of plans that exist in and outside of services. On the right-hand side of this graphic, you can see treatment plans, and on the left-hand side, recovery plans. We have person-centered recovery plans in the middle. The treatment plans on the right-hand side are historically the only kind of plans you would find in mental health services. They were typically what mental health clinics are working with when they begin to implement person-centered recovery planning. We will say that more about this in a moment, but they were really an administrative tool. On the other end are recovery plans that were personal and often not even discussed in services, and still aren't if people don't choose to bring them up. Person-centered recovery plans have some elements of each of the others embedded within them. Let's take a closer look. Let's start with personal recovery plans. Most often, these are created outside of formal services, and when they were first developed, they were intended to be an alternative to the not always helpful help people had been getting in services. Wellness Recovery Action Plan is a pretty well-known example. People receiving services might bring these to their support teams, but it isn't a requirement, and many people choose not to. These personal recovery plans help support people's everyday self-management and well-being. On the other side, treatment or service plans are fundamentally tied to professional services and have an administrative function. They ensure that services can be justified and paid for by insurance, for example. In the middle, person-centered recovery plans are aimed at still maintaining that administrative function so they can be used to justify payment by demonstrating medical necessity. But they are also meant to be a meaningful tool for the person, including professional, personal, and natural supporter actions. It's an ambitious thing, but as we saw in product, having planning that meaningfully involves the person increases their satisfaction and engagement in care. Here are some general notes about what to expect from a written person-centered recovery plan. They're highly individualized and strengths-based. They're clearly oriented to the person's pursuit of the goals or vision for their life, that quality of life that we talked about earlier. They're a living document that is constantly revised and evolving as the person's preferences and situation change and evolve. They're documented in a way that makes it clear that they've been co-created. In this video, Amanda speaks about what she sees as being quite different in person-centered recovery plans when she's reviewing documentation.
I've done a lot of documentation as a clinical social worker. I've also been a supervisor and I've reviewed a lot of plans for quality improvement. And thinking back over like what kind of sums up a person-centered plan document is you can see evidence of the person's identity, like it's not all clinical, even though there is some clinical. Um, and when you put the plans side by side, you can tell whose plan it is. So they're not cookie cutter. Um, and you just really get a sense of like who they are and what they want in life beyond just, services and things.
The basic PCRP framework has 5 components: goal, strengths, barriers, objectives, and actions. Let's go through each element and how they relate to each other. The goal in this framework is the vision that a person has for the life that they want. It might be something like, I want to get my kids back, or I want my own place. This piece functions as a person's motivation for action. It's what they really want in life. Strengths. These are a person's abilities. Sure, they're also their unique qualities, and it's who they are. It's how you begin to see who a person is beyond services, who they are in their broader life. They are what the person is building from and what make plans and care truly individualized. Barriers are what get in the way of achieving what a person wants most in life. They are specific and relevant to a person's goal. Objectives are often thought of as short-term goals. We also think of them as some of the anticipated signs that progress is being made. They are measurable, and while they aren't quite as ambitious as that main goal, they are desired results. They also tend to relate directly to barriers and draw on a person's strengths. The last component is action, sometimes called services or interventions, but really, these are actions intended to produce desired results. They include both professional or billable services, but also personal wellness strategies and what natural supporters might do too. Sometimes it can be difficult to imagine how person centered recovery plans become highly individualized. To give you an example, we will share a clip where Ebony speaks about anger. Anger is often viewed as a problem, but here she talks about how it can also serve a purpose and shares some of the personal action steps that she could take or someone she might support may take to express their anger in services or in their day to day life. Those actions might be included in some of the strengths of someone's plan and also some of their self directed or personal action steps. She would have talked about this in the process so it could become incorporated meaningfully into the plan and reflect the person.
I feel in clinical settings, we're asked a lot to calm down. And yes, of course, I want to show up in different ways. And there are reasons to be upset. I always give the examples that there are a lot of protests and change and things that have come from folks being upset. But it's not just about that. Life happens. There's a lot of things in this climate going on right now where folks are mad and angry. And to just say calm down doesn't work all the time. As someone who used to self injure, I find other ways to express myself. And sometimes that is journaling and things that are more calm. But it's not always some of the DBT skills, dialectical behavioral therapy skills that was shared, like squeezing an orange. I may support someone to throw that orange as long as it's not at anyone, you know? Um,
So the written plan should reflect the process. It should highlight and or incorporate the person's strengths, their interests, their preferences, their talents in the plan and its implementation. Remember those action steps? You can individualize those. The plan should use the person's preferred name, language, and identity throughout. It should include meaningful goal statements using language that is clear and accessible. A goal statement is often written in a person's own words. The plan should be easily accessible and should reflect the services and supports, both paid and unpaid, in its documentation. Importantly, the written plan is not developed and then considered done. It should be modified and updated regularly. And the engagement with what activities are outlined in the plan are what make up the ongoing care a person receives, along with their own actions. Because remember, self directed action steps, those wellness actions that a person will take on their own, are part of a person centered recovery plan. We introduced the recovery roadmap tools in the section on process, and the content for the written document closely aligns with the other CTAC course on specific plan elements. You can download these resources on the CTAC website. It is included in the resource list. So you've made it through all 4 P's of person-centered recovery planning. As you can see, PCRP is much more than just a written plan. It requires and encourages a recovery-oriented philosophy. It has specific outcomes or products at many scales. It is a process that centers the person and involves their supporters and results in a meaningful, individualized, and strengths-based plan. To continue learning, and specifically about plan components, we encourage you to view the course titled Person-Centered Recovery Planning, a Review of Planning Components, which is presented by Amanda Bowman, LCSW. A resource list is available for download on the CTAC website. Those resources include the exercises in this course. Finally, the references that we used for this learning session. Thank you for your participation.